All set.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today with you, and I will be starting to share my screen. Please let me know if you can see my PowerPoint. Can you see it?
Yes.
Perfect. So today we will be talking about color use in inclusive classrooms. My name is Dr. Roseli Rojo, and I am one of the accessibility fellows for this year, to 2025. I am also an assistant professor of Caribbean Studies and Spanish at the Department of Modern Languages and Literatures. And today will be very interesting to talk about some of the strategies we will need to use or to implement, because some of the time we are aware of these tools, but in some cases we are not, let's say, savvy to being able to use those tools and strategies that we have in place, not only in SUNY Oswego, but also in other systems that I will be talking about today. So my first slide here, I choose two classrooms from our campus, and probably you will identify them. And the idea is that normally when we prepare our classes, we are focused or concerned about the materials, the PowerPoint presentation, perhaps the handouts. But sometimes we forget about something that is very important, but that are elements that are in place in the classroom. I'm not only talking about the layout, but also the colors of the classroom. And it's true that this is the elements that we have, and we have to use them into being able to get the best of them. But let's say we think about two specific cases that I want to share with you. So imagine students trying to focus on a classroom board that blends into the wall behind it. Another trying to read a worksheet printed in high contrast black on stark white paper, only to experience visual distortion. These challenges are not rare, and they are routine for many students or our students in the classroom that may have neurodivergent profiles or disabilities. So according to a study, for instance, conducted by Bilkent University in Turkey, students with ADHD corrected significantly more of their mistakes in rooms where the board and the wall were painted in contrasting colors. But as you can see in these pictures that I selected randomly, both the screen and the wall are white. So the simple use of differentiated colors may help them sustain attention and reduce those error rates. So that's very important to keep that in mind, because even though we cannot paint the walls, we can incorporate specific colors that may be better for them, for being able to concentrate and avoiding that blending between the screen and the wall. Now, another study that I've been compiling for this presentation was conducted in Carnegie Mellon University, and they found that using warm pastel backgrounds, for instance, peach, soft yellow, improved reading speed and reduced visual stress in students with, for instance, dyslexia. So compared to traditional black on white print. So those are ideas that we can have in place, for instance, to print in handouts and to change the background of the sheet that we are printing on. Students on the autism spectrum, on the other hand, are also deeply affected by color and light. Research published in the Journal of Autism and Development Disorders reports that muted tones and pastel shades help reduce sensory overstimulation and foster a sense of calm in classroom environments. In short, poor color design can be a barrier, but intentional, inclusive color choices can be transformative, and those are resources that we have in place. And that is why we have to, with this presentation and with the work that the Accessibility Fellow Program is doing at SUNY Oswego and in SUNY in general, we want to pay attention and to being aware to the important ideas of having those 5 particular basic principles in accessibility. And the number 3 of those principles is color accessibility. And it's very important. And it's a cheaper tool that we have in place every single day. That the only thing is that we have to be aware of how to use those resources for being able to help better our students. So why color accessibility? Well, as I mentioned before, color is a powerful communication tool. Poor color use can create barriers for students with color blindness, ADHD, dyslexia, or cognitive disabilities. And the accessible design benefits everyone. It is not only for them, but for all of the students in the classroom in general. And here I can share those links if you are interested in reading. But I want to tell you that for this particular presentation, the articles I was able to find, that I found, were more focused on, let's say, the childhood state. So most of those articles are trying to even raise awareness of how to incorporate those tools for early ages. But of course, we can extend that information, the resources, and to being able to incorporate them into our classrooms in everyday designing of PowerPoint slides, or the handouts, or the models in Brightspace, for instance. So I have created some of them here. For instance, I will read some of them. For instance, for ADHD students, they recommended to use cool colors like blue and green, contrasting wall. That's very important because the blending part is essential for them to being able to concentrate in the classroom. And that reduces, of course, overstimulation and improves the focus of those students. For those students with dyslexia, they recommended warm pastel backgrounds, peach, orange, yellow, and they try to avoid stark black and white contrasts. And this improves reading speed and reduces visual stress. For those students in the spectrum, so they recommended muted and pastel tones, for instance, soft blue, greens, and avoid bright colors. And in my opinion, we can create a balance. So we can create, when we design our PowerPoint slides, and I will be talking about this in a couple of seconds, we can be aware of how to incorporate, for instance, in a slide that can create or can have those soft blue tones or yellow tones as backgrounds, so being able to help for those students to feel calm and to being able to focus on all the resources and activities that are happening in the classroom as well. So before talking about the common barriers in color use that we normally face, I want to comment that for me was during this semester in my journey in accessibility, it was the first time that I was able to know more about how to incorporate the resources in the classroom and to develop my materials with accessibility in mind. There were very important tools that I was using, and I still use it during my work with accessibility first decade. And I recommend for those of you that will be starting as in this path in accessibility, the fast track to accessibility for any role, which I think is very useful. You will see multiple videos, short videos that will tackle particular ideas on those 5 basic principles for accessibility. And I noticed now that we have a problem here with the PowerPoint. So the second item that I incorporated is the page that we have in SUNY Oswego that the Accessibility Fellow Program is hosting in our Brightspace. And I'm sorry, no, it is not in Brightspace, it's in the general system. And I think it's very useful because you can find there multiple resources, videos, and also you can consult other conferences that other colleagues have brought into attention to tackle particular topics. Now, the common barriers in color use. First, we have color-only cues like red wrong, green right, and normally before starting my journey in accessibility, I noticed that I use red pen when grading my students' materials. Now I'm aware that it could be a very important tool not to use it because the students with a visual impairment will decode these uses of colors as brown. So they will not be able to understand the uses of the differences between green and right. So we should keep that in mind. So low contrast, that is another problem. Too much color and the overuse of bright colors. So for the first barrier, for a specific example, color-only cues like red, wrong, green, right. So students with red-green color vision deficiencies may not perceive red and green as distinctive. So when feedback relies on color alone, for example, red, brown, green, correct, both options may appear in similar shades for them. Both of them will be in brown shades. So this may, of course, difficult or impossible for students to understand what is the difference between the feedback that we are providing to our students. So I alternatively have incorporated another use that may be work for them. For instance, instead of only relying on color, we can use bold, underline, levels, or shapes. So instead of the colors, we can incorporate a particular sign for saying this is correct and this is incorrect. And that way we are working so all the students will feel and will understand the color system and the materials and the strategies that we are using for helping them. Then this is related to contrast. And I will share at the end of the presentation particular pages in which we can double check that the contrast that we are using is the appropriate one. So I have brought 4 examples. And the 2 last one, of course, when you use the foreground in a color that is almost, we cannot see it. So the thing is that when we use small text, it is very important to have the a contrast ratio higher than 4.51 for the background. And I will talk more about that in a couple of seconds, but I want you to notice the differences between these 4 different models that I'm comparing here. So you will see that in the first case, when I use the text in white and the background in black, this is wonderful because we are really able to see what the text is saying to us, even though the text size could be very short or small. In the same case, it's the same. Now, for the 2 last examples, it's also important to notice here the problem of the use of patterns that are very bright instead of more soft colors. So that could be very, let's say, difficult for students to process, and they could feel overwhelmed for the uses of those colors in the classroom setting or PowerPoint slides. The following, okay, this is so too much color. It's overwhelms the students and also ourselves as we are trying to understand and to decode the importance of those elements included in the design. So in this case, the second text, it is not visible. Legible. You cannot understand what is the purpose of the text. So the idea is, again, to being able to use soft tones and to create the contrast between the background and the foreground or the text incorporated into the image. Now, that was the part that we need to avoid in our materials design. Now, what is the principles in design that we have to keep in mind? First, we have to use high contrast. We have to aim for 0.51 ratio or higher. I remember that Decker was saying that in the case for the previous examples that I brought, this example, the high contrast in white on dark background, the ratio proportion, if I recall correct, it was 21. So it's a very high ratio, and it's in that way it works. So we have to try to work with those proportions to being able to understand if that image, that design is appropriate for our students. Second, never use color alone. So try to add labels or icons or patterns, and to be consistent. If you decide that the title or the headings will be in a specific color, keeping in mind this high contrast idea, we should maintain the same proportion, the same patterns all over all materials. In that case, in that particular uses of the materials in the design, students will be able to decode, okay, this is a pattern that the professor will be using during the semester, so they will feel comfortable and they will know what to expect in terms of design, in terms of those materials being prepared. Well, stay consistent. I was trying to explain that. So use a predictable palette of colors and design, and minimize overstimulation. So use calm colors, clean layout, so students will feel calm, will not be stressed because of the colors they're receiving as an input. Practical classroom tips. And I have some more minutes. First, label all color-coded materials with text. And I was explaining that before. So try to be consistent and try to identify what colors you will be using for what particular part of your materials, your design over the semester. Use underlines or symbols with color highlights. Do not rely only on colors. Try to incorporate symbols, shapes that help the students to understand what is the purpose of the information that we are trying to convey. Avoid relying on red, green for evaluation. That explained that before. And choose accessible themes in PowerPoint and Canvas. And that brought me to the following idea, which is what tools and resources we can use for being able to identify those. First, if you are starting your journey with accessibility and try to understand those resources, what are the pages or the tools that we can use for doing that? And then what specific materials we can use, for instance, for understand what is the appropriate ratio that we'll need to use. And now I will stop for a minute and I will share. Okay. First here, and I also have the links, but you can, if you need it, you can find it also in the, by the way, the accessibility page that we have in SUNY Oswego. There, we have a lot of resources that we can use for understanding, for instance, the basic principles and digital accessibility materials that we can use. And here, the use color carefully have particular good and summarizing way the most important ideas that we have to keep in mind in order to being savvy when we use color in our presentation in our materials in general. Now, for understanding the that proportion between the foreground and the background, the ratio that we have to keep in mind, this page is very important because we can, well, basically to play with the tool and try to understand what to do with it. So, and then you will see that the first part, the WCAGAA, talks about the small text. And then the AAA talks about those larger texts in which we use, let's say, the font of 14 or 18. And you can be more, let's say, it's a more space, room for playing more with other colors, because as the texts are larger, we are able to understand it better. And then in Brightspace, we also have those resources in place. For instance, if you go to new announcements, and you want to create a text, you can play with the color. And then here, it will tell you if it's a small text, and we can create also the contrast and to have the ratio between the color that you are using for the text and the background, okay? So in general, And finally, these have been my main goal for today, for sharing some tools that we can use to implement in our classroom and to being able to be aware of how color can change our students' life in general and their performances in a classroom. So thank you so much for joining me today. And if you have any question, I will be happy to answer it or sharing the tools that I have used for this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.